If you had told Nathan Holloway that the woman walking through that restaurant door would one day become the most important person in his life, he would have laughed. Then he would have walked straight out, because the woman crossing that dining room wasn't a stranger. She was Victoria Ashbourne, his ex-wife's mother, the woman who had watched his marriage collapse from a careful distance and never once reached out. And somehow, impossibly, she was his blind date. If this story already has you hooked, hit that like button and drop your city in the comments. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. The reservation was for 7 o'clock. Nathan arrived at 6:53 because that was the kind of man he was. Punctual out of habit, early out of anxiety. He stood on the sidewalk outside Clement's, a mid-range Italian place on Harwick Street that his friend Daniel had chosen, presumably because it struck the right balance between "I made an effort" and "we can leave after one drink without guilt." The evening air carried the particular exhaustion of a Thursday in late October, the kind of night where the city felt slightly wrung out, its lights blurring at the edges. He checked his phone. No new messages. Daniel had texted that morning. "She's great. Smart, direct, a little intimidating, but in a good way. You'll like her. Just go." Nathan had stared at that for a long moment, then put his phone face down on the kitchen counter and gone back to packing his daughter's lunch. Maisie was 4. She had her mother's dark eyes and Nathan's stubborn streak, and she had been asleep by the time his neighbor Carol came over to sit with her. He'd kissed her forehead, and she'd stirred just enough to say, "Daddy smells funny," which he took to mean she approved of the cologne. He pushed through the restaurant's glass door. Clement's was warm inside, all amber lighting and the low murmur of other people's evenings. A hostess with tired eyes and a laminated smile asked for his name, and he gave it, and she walked him to a table tucked near the back wall, which was either romantic or tactical. Hard to tell. He ordered a glass of water and loosened his tie by half an inch and told himself to breathe. This was his first date in 3 years. He hadn't been on a date since the divorce. Hadn't wanted to, mostly. After Claire left, his world had compressed into something small and manageable. Maisie's school. Maisie's appointments. Maisie's nightmares about the dark. His own life had become a kind of supporting role, and somewhere in the past 3 years he'd made a kind of peace with that. It wasn't unhappiness, exactly. It was more like suspension, like a man who'd set something down and couldn't quite remember where he'd put his hands before. Daniel had been pushing for months. "You can't just disappear, man. Maisie needs a father who's actually alive." Nathan had resisted until he couldn't. 3 years was a long time. He was 33 years old, and he was tired of eating dinner over the kitchen sink. So here he was. He looked at the door, and the door opened. The woman who walked in wasn't what he'd imagined. He hadn't known what he'd imagined, really. Something vague and manageable, he supposed. Someone soft-edged and uncertain, the way he felt right now. Instead, the woman who walked in was tall, composed, and moved through the restaurant the way people move through spaces they own. Dark coat, the kind of dark that costs money. Hair pulled back with a few strands loose at the temples, silver threaded through deep brown, worn without apology. She spoke briefly to the hostess and then turned, scanning the room. Her eyes found him. Nathan's mind went completely, utterly blank. It was Victoria Ashbourne, his ex-wife's mother, the woman who had sat at the opposite end of a dinner table for 3 years of holidays and never once asked him a single personal question, who had looked at him across rooms with an expression he'd never been able to decode. Not quite disapproval, not quite warmth, just something careful and measured and completely unreadable. Who had shaken his hand at his own wedding with the composed detachment of someone signing a document. She was walking toward his table. He had the brief, genuine impulse to stand up and walk directly into the kitchen. He stayed. He didn't know why he stayed. Some mixture of paralysis and the particular Midwestern stubbornness that his own mother had installed in him. The deep conviction that causing a scene was worse than any alternative. So he sat there, and Victoria Ashbourne walked to his table, and her expression, he watched it happen in real time, the way recognition moved across her face like a weather system. A flicker. A stillness. And then something that might have been, if he was reading it correctly, the same trapped feeling he was experiencing. She stopped at the table's edge. "Nathan," she said. "Victoria." Neither of them moved. Then she pulled out the chair across from him and sat down, setting her bag on the floor with controlled precision and signaled the nearest waiter with a slight lift of her chin. "I'll take a gin and tonic," she said. "Please make it a double." He watched her. "I wasn't sure if you were going to turn around." "I considered it." She unfolded the napkin across her lap without looking at him. "I decided that would be more awkward." "How?" "Because I'd still have to tell Daniel, and Daniel would ask me to explain, and I'm not interested in that conversation." Nathan stared at her. "Daniel set this up?" "Apparently your Daniel and my colleague Patricia have been in communication." She said it flatly, the way someone announces a minor bureaucratic catastrophe. "Patricia thought she was doing me a favor." "She doesn't know who you are." "Who I am, I mean. In relation to yet." "No." Victoria picked up the menu. "She doesn't know Claire. I don't discuss my family at work. It's a personal preference." A pause. Something tight at the edge of it. "One of many that I apparently need to re-examine." The waiter brought her drink. She took a sip immediately, eyes moving across the menu with the practiced efficiency of a woman who rarely wasted time on decisions she considered small. Nathan hadn't touched his water. He felt absurdly like he was 18 years old and being evaluated. The old feeling came back without warning, that low-grade discomfort of being in this woman's presence, the sense that no matter how he held himself or what words he chose, he was doing something wrong without knowing what. "We don't have to stay," he said. "No," she agreed. "We don't." "But you're looking at the menu." She looked up at him then. Really looked at him, for the first time tonight, for maybe the first time in any room they'd ever shared. Her eyes were dark brown, a shade darker than Claire's, and there was something in them he hadn't expected. Not warmth, not yet, but a kind of sharp attention that felt oddly like respect. "I took a car here," she said, "and I'm hungry. And the alternative is going home to an empty apartment and eating whatever's in my refrigerator, which I know without looking is a container of leftover rice, and something I should have thrown away last Tuesday." She set the menu down. "So I think we stay. 1 hour. We eat something. We survive it. Agreed?" Nathan picked up his own menu for the first time. "Agreed." Was. The first 20 minutes were the kind of silence that has texture. They ordered. Nathan got the chicken piccata because it was the first thing he'd read, and he couldn't bring himself to choose carefully. Victoria ordered the branzino without looking up, then asked the waiter something about the preparation, listened to the answer, and accepted it. He watched the way she handled ordinary interaction, efficient, direct, never unkind, but never particularly warm either. The mask, he remembered now. She'd always had it. He'd spent 3 years in her company assuming the mask was the whole person. "How is Maisie?" she asked. He hadn't expected that. "Good. She's 4 now." "I know how old she is." "Right." He paused. "She's good, stubborn, asks too many questions about things I can't explain, like why the moon doesn't fall down and whether worms have feelings." Something almost moved in Victoria's expression. She sounds like Claire at that age. Nathan's jaw tightened involuntarily. He picked up his water glass, bought himself a second. "Does she?" "I don't say that to be difficult," Victoria said. She said it evenly, no particular apology in it, but no sharpness either. "She's Claire's daughter. The resemblance would be natural." "She's my daughter," he said. "Whatever Maisie is, she built it herself." Silence. Victoria studied him for a moment. "That's fair," she said quietly, and he had the odd sensation that he'd passed something without realizing he'd been tested. He exhaled, tried again. "Do you see her, Claire?" "Not often." Victoria turned her wine glass slowly, not drinking. "We speak on occasion. She's in Portland now, I think. She mentioned a new job." A pause with some kind of weight behind it. "She didn't mention Maisie." Nathan looked at her. "She doesn't ask about her," he said. "I stopped expecting her to." He didn't know why he was saying that to this woman, of all people. Maybe because she was the only person in the world who shared this particular grief, who had also known Claire in the before, who also knew the specific shape of the silence she left. Victoria set her wine glass down carefully. "I want to ask you something," she said, "and I'm going to ask it directly because I'm not good at the other way. You're allowed to tell me it's none of my business." "Go ahead." "Did you blame yourself?" She met his eyes. "When it ended?" The question sat between them. Nathan turned it over, feeling its edges. 3 years of weight in those 4 words. Yeah, he said finally, for a long time. Why? Because... He stopped, tried again. She was unhappy. I knew she was unhappy. I told myself I just hadn't done enough. Hadn't been what she needed. I went over it constantly. Every argument, every time I came home tired, every night she sat in a room by herself and I let her. I kept thinking if I'd just paid closer attention... Nathan, Victoria's voice was flat and firm, not unkind, just certain. Claire was unhappy before she met you. He stared at her. She was unhappy at 16, Victoria continued, and something moved behind her eyes now, something old and complicated. She was unhappy at 20. She has been, as long as I've known her, fundamentally at war with her own life. That's not a result of anything you did or didn't do. It's not a reflection on you at all. A beat. I should have said that to you a long time ago. I didn't. The food arrived. Nathan looked down at his plate without seeing it. Why didn't you? He asked. Because I'm not good at those conversations. She picked up her fork. I'm better at this kind of conversation, apparently. The one where we've already established that tonight is a disaster, and there's nothing left to manage. He laughed. It came out before he could stop it. A real laugh. The kind that surprised him. Victoria looked up, and something shifted in her face. Not a smile quite, but close. I'm not sure I'd call it a disaster, he said. You were thinking about leaving when I walked in. I was thinking about walking into the kitchen, he admitted. Is there a difference? In terms of commitment, yes. She almost smiled. He watched it happen, the slight movement at the corner of her mouth, and realized it was the first time he'd ever seen it. In 3 years of holidays and dinners and strained Sunday afternoons, he'd never seen Victoria Ashbourne almost smile. The hour they'd agreed on passed without either of them noticing. By the time Nathan registered that they'd been talking for 2 hours, the restaurant had thinned around them. Their plates had been cleared and the waiter had stopped hovering with the particular tact of someone who understood that the table wasn't leaving soon. Victoria had ordered a second gin and tonic, half of which sat untouched beside her elbow. She was telling him about her company, not in the way people boast, but in the way people describe something that cost them. Ashbourne's strategic group was hers, built over 2 decades from a small consulting firm into something real and formidable. She talked about the early years with the careful precision of someone who hadn't talked about them much, maybe ever. The clients who'd underestimated her, the deals that had nearly broken her, the year she'd fired her own deputy because he'd been skimming from accounts, and she'd had to do it without enough evidence, on instinct alone, and had spent 6 months waiting to see if she'd been right. Were you? Nathan asked. Yes. No satisfaction in it, just fact. What happened when the evidence came out? I didn't feel vindicated, if that's what you're asking. I felt tired. She looked at her glass. Making hard decisions in time means you rarely get to feel good about them. You just have to live in them and trust yourself. Do you? He asked. Trust yourself. She considered that longer than he expected. In business? Yes. Mostly. Her finger traced the rim of the glass. Personally, she stopped. You don't have to answer that. No, it's... She seemed to reassemble something. I made choices in my personal life based on the assumption that distance was protection, that if I didn't need anyone, no one could disappoint me. A pause. The record on whether that worked is not favorable. What does that mean? It means I've been alone a long time by design, and the design hasn't made me particularly happy. She said it without self-pity, which somehow made it worse. Just a woman reporting a fact about her own life the way she'd report a quarterly loss. Here it is. Here's the number. Not a surprise, just a result. Nathan leaned forward, both forearms on the table. Did you ever think about reaching out when the divorce happened? To me, I mean? She looked at him steadily. Yes. Why didn't you? Because I didn't know what I would say. She set her glass down. Because saying I know my daughter and I'm not surprised felt cruel, and saying I should have warned you felt like it was too late. A long silence. And because I thought you'd assume I was taking sides. Whose side would you have been taking? She met his gaze. Yours. He sat with that, Outside, through the restaurant's front windows, the street had gone quiet, the city doing its usual thing, contracting at night, pulling its noise inward, leaving pockets of silence in the spaces between things. She loved you, you know, Victoria said. In her way. It just wasn't. She chose the words carefully. Enough. Loving someone in your own way, when your way is to pull back when things get hard, doesn't constitute love in any useful sense. I know that now, Nathan said. You didn't before? I thought love was supposed to be hard, that working for it meant something, that if it cost enough. He stopped. I was young. You were 28 when you got married. That's not particularly young. It's young enough to confuse effort with love. He looked at his hands. I spent 3 years after the divorce wondering what I'd done. And then I stopped having the energy to wonder and just started driving Maisie to school. Victoria nodded slowly. She asked about you, Nathan said, and then regretted it immediately, because he hadn't planned to say it and didn't know why he had. Victoria went very still. What? About 6 months after the divorce, she was going through this phase where she asked about everyone, who people were, where they came from. She asked where Grandma Victoria was. He watched Victoria's face. I didn't know what to say. I said we weren't in touch anymore. She accepted it. She was 3. A silence he didn't know how to read. Victoria's expression had closed down slightly, the way a door doesn't slam but simply stops being open. But there was something in her eyes that hadn't been there before. Something that looked, if he was being honest, like grief. I didn't know how to, she started. I wasn't telling you to make you feel bad, Nathan said quickly. I just, he stopped. I don't know why I told you. I'm sorry. Don't apologize. Her voice was slightly different now. Lower. More careful. She asked about me. Yeah. Victoria picked up her gin and tonic and finished it. Set it down. Looked at the table. I've been selfish, she said, not quite to him. In ways I didn't fully account for. You didn't do anything to hurt her. No, I did nothing, period. Which, at her age, is probably worse. She exhaled slowly. I told myself it would be complicated, that I didn't want to intrude, that you wouldn't want to hear from me. She paused. Those were all true and also all excuses. Nathan said nothing. Let her have the silence. How do you do it? She asked eventually. Do what? Be that honest with yourself. She looked at him with something that might have been genuine curiosity. Just now, when you said you confused effort with love, you said it like a fact. No performance around it, no self-defense. She frowned slightly. I don't do that. Sure you do. You just did it about Maisie. She considered that. Maybe. It gets easier, Nathan said. When you have a 4-year-old who asks you directly every time you're deflecting, they're very hard to bullshit. This time she did smile. Small, careful, real. The kind of smile that didn't have much practice. Instead, they stood outside the restaurant at 9:47, which Nathan registered with mild amazement because they'd agreed to 1 hour and somehow produced nearly 3. The air was cold enough now to see breath, and the street was quiet except for a cab crossing the intersection at the end of the block. I didn't expect this, Nathan said. No. Victoria buttoned her coat, not looking at him. Neither did I. I think Daniel and Patricia thought they were doing us a favor. They were wrong about what the favor would consist of, she said, but perhaps not about the favor itself. He looked at her. Is that you admitting it wasn't entirely terrible? I'm a CEO, Nathan. I don't make admissions. A pause. It wasn't entirely terrible. He almost laughed. Can I ask you something? You've been asking me things all night. Why stop? What would you have done if you'd walked in and seen me and I hadn't noticed you yet? Would you have left? She was quiet long enough that it was an answer. I'd like to say no, she said, but I'm trying to stop lying to myself about things like that. So yes. Probably yes. Then I'm glad you saw me notice you first. She looked at him then, sideways, something complicated in it. That's a strange thing to say. You stay when you're being watched, he said. You leave when you can. Another silence. The cab he'd been watching made its turn and disappeared. "You paid attention," she said finally, not warmly but with something. Recognition, maybe. "You're an interesting person to pay attention to." She looked away. "Good night, Nathan." "Good night, Victoria." He stood on the sidewalk and watched her walk to the car that was waiting for her. She'd texted her driver somewhere in the last 30 minutes without him seeing, and the door closed and the car pulled away, and he was left on Harwick Street in the October cold trying to figure out what exactly had just happened. He pulled out his phone, texted Daniel. "That was not what I expected." Daniel replied immediately, because Daniel always did. Good or bad? Nathan looked down the street where her car had gone. Thought about 3 years. Thought about the way she'd said I should have said that to you a long time ago. Thought about her face when he'd told her Maisie had asked. "I genuinely don't know," he typed back. "I'll tell you when I figure it out." He put his phone in his pocket and walked to his own car. His feet on the sidewalk, the cold air at his throat, the night doing what it always did. Asking nothing, offering no particular comfort. But for the first time in 3 years, he didn't feel suspended. He felt like a man who'd set something down and was slowly, cautiously, remembering where to put his hands. He didn't sleep well. That was normal enough. He rarely slept well these days. Maisie went through phases, and she was in one now where she came padding into his room at 2 or 3 in the morning, said nothing, climbed over him with the complete physical confidence of someone who considered his space entirely her own, and went back to sleep wedged against his side. He'd learned to wake at the sound of her door and not fully surface, just shift to make room. But tonight she slept through, and it was only him in the dark, staring at the ceiling with the hum of the city outside. He kept turning the evening over, not with the hot, embarrassed feeling he'd expected, not the cringe of having talked too much or said something wrong. Something else. The feeling of a knot in something he hadn't realized was still tied. He'd never had a real conversation with Victoria Ashbourne. In 3 years of sharing tables and exchanging pleasantries, they'd inhabited the same rooms without actually being in them together. He'd assumed she found him lacking. He'd assumed the careful distance was a verdict. He'd never considered that the distance might be something she maintained in every direction. He'd never considered that she might have been watching what happened to his marriage, not with indifference, but with a particular helpless knowledge. That she might have known what was coming and had no language for the warning. He thought about what she'd said. "I should have said that to you a long time ago." He thought about her face when he mentioned Maisie asking. He pulled his phone off the nightstand. The screen lit up with nothing, no messages. He put it back. He told himself he wasn't waiting to hear from her. He was just not sleeping, which was different. He was still telling himself that when his phone buzzed. He grabbed it faster than he should have. The message was from an unsaved number, but he recognized the area code, Downtown Business District. "I want to apologize again for what I said about Claire in the restaurant. It was appropriate as information, but I'm not certain it was appropriate as something to say over dinner to a man I haven't seen in 3 years. I've been thinking about whether I chose the right moment." He stared at it for a second. Then, "How did you get my number?" A brief pause. "Patricia had it from Daniel. I asked her for it. I realize that may seem presumptuous. It's fine." He typed it before he thought about it. "And for what it's worth, I needed to hear it. I've been carrying that for a long time." Another pause. Longer. "I know. I could tell." He set his phone on his chest and looked at the ceiling. Outside, something, a car, a late-night bus, moved past on the street below. His phone buzzed again. "How long have you been awake?" He looked at the clock. 1:14 a.m. "Since I got home," he typed. "You?" "I don't sleep particularly well in general. Tonight more than usual." "What are you doing?" "Sitting in my kitchen, reading something I'm not actually taking in." A pause. "You?" "Ceiling inspection. Are you finding anything?" "Couple of old water stains." "Nothing structural." A pause. Then from her, "Nathan." He waited. "I don't normally do this." "Do what?" "Text someone at 1 in the morning about nothing." He looked at her last message for a moment. Thought about her sitting in her kitchen. Expensive, he imagined. Chrome and clean lines. The whole apartment probably looking like it had been arranged by someone and then lived in alone for a long time. "Neither do I," he wrote. "But I'm glad you did." No response for a minute. Then, get some sleep. You have a 4-year-old. She'll be up at 6 regardless of what I do. It's a fixed law of the universe. Good night, Nathan. Good night, Victoria. He set the phone down, closed his eyes. He didn't think about Clements or the conversation or the odd, complicated physics of what tonight had been. He just lay there in the quiet of his apartment with the city doing its thing outside and thought about the fact that somewhere across town, in a kitchen that probably looked nothing like his, Victoria Ashbourne was also not sleeping. And that thought, more than anything else, was what finally pulled him under. Maisie was up at 6:03. He heard her door, heard her feet on the hardwood. She walked flat-footed, slapping the floor with more enthusiasm than purpose. And then she was in his doorway, hair gone entirely sideways, holding her stuffed rabbit by one ear. "Daddy," she said, "I'm hungry." "I know," he said. "Come here first." She crossed the room and climbed into bed beside him with complete confidence, settled in against his shoulder, said nothing for about 45 seconds. This was their morning ritual, the small pocket of quiet before the day required anything of either of them. "Did you have a good time last night?" she asked. He looked down at her. "Who taught you to ask that?" "Carol said you went on a date." She said the word like it was something exotic. She said dates are when grown-ups go have dinner to see if they like each other. "Carol talks too much." "Did you like her?" He was quiet a moment. "I don't know yet," he said honestly. Maisie considered this with the gravity of a 4-year-old who took information seriously. "That's okay," she said finally. "Sometimes I don't know if I like someone at first either, like Jamie in my class. I didn't know for a long time." "Do you like Jamie now?" "Yeah, she lets me have the blue crayon." He pressed a kiss to the top of her head. "Smart girl." "I know," she said, without any irony at all, and then wriggled out of the blanket and headed for the kitchen because breakfast was not going to appear by itself. He lay there another moment, looking at the ceiling again. One dinner, 3 hours, a text message at 1 in the morning. He didn't know what any of it was. He didn't know what it could be, or whether anything it might become would be worth the complication of what it started as. He knew there were 100 reasonable objections to any of this, and he knew that last night he hadn't thought about any of them, not once. Not until right now. He knew that was probably worth paying attention to. "Daddy!" Maisie's voice from the kitchen. "Where's the cereal?" "Same place it always is," he called back. "I can't reach." He got up. The morning came in the way mornings do. Without ceremony, without resolution, just the next thing, and then the next thing after that. He poured cereal. He poured milk. He poured coffee for himself and stood at the kitchen window while Maisie narrated her breakfast in the way she narrated everything, a running commentary on the cereal, the rabbit, the color of the sky outside. His phone was on the counter. He didn't check it. He sipped his coffee and watched his daughter eat breakfast and let the morning be what it was. And when he eventually picked up the phone, 20 minutes later, there was nothing from Victoria. Just Daniel, asking if he was alive. He typed back, "Yes, tell you about it later." Outside, the October morning was doing its thing, pale and honest, asking nothing. He had to get Maisie to school. He had to get himself to work. He had a meeting at 9 that he hadn't fully prepared for, and a report due by end of week, and 4 days until his next day off when he could sleep past 6 if Maisie let him, which she wouldn't. He had a life. A full, real, imperfect life. And somewhere in the middle of it, for the first time in 3 years, something had moved. He didn't know what to call it yet. But for the first time in a long time, he wasn't sure he needed to. 3 days passed before he heard from her again. Not that he was counting. He wasn't the kind of man who counted days, or at least he'd stopped being that kind of man sometime around Maisie's 2nd birthday, when he'd realized that keeping track of what wasn't happening only made the hours longer. He had enough to track. School pickups. The water pressure issue in the 2nd bathroom that he'd been meaning to call the landlord about for 6 weeks. The report that had been due Thursday and had required staying up past midnight twice to finish. He didn't count the days. He noticed them, though. It was a Tuesday afternoon when his phone buzzed with an unknown calendar invitation, and then a message from the same unsaved number. "There's a coffee place on Meridian called Brackish. They make a decent Americano, and the tables are far enough apart that you can have a conversation without performing it for strangers. I'll be there Thursday at noon if you want to meet. No obligation." He read it twice, saved her number, typed back, I have a meeting until 11:30. I can be there by 12:15. Her reply came in under a minute. Fine. Just that. Fine. He put his phone away and went back to his landlord's voicemail. Brackish was narrow and unhurried, the kind of place that had been in the same location for 15 years and hadn't bothered updating anything because its regulars didn't want it to. The walls were exposed brick, and the lighting came mostly from the front windows. Nathan arrived at 12:11, damp across the shoulders from the drizzle that had been threatening since morning and finally committed to itself around noon. Victoria was already there. Of course she was. She had a table near the back. The same instinct as before. Walls behind her, sight lines open, and a cup in front of her that she was reading over without appearing to read. She looked up when he came in. Same assessment as Clement's, that quick calibrating look. "You're wet," she said. "It's raining." "I know. I arrived before it started." She said it without particular triumph, just fact. He sat down and unwound his scarf and flagged the nearest person for a coffee and then looked at her. She was in a charcoal blazer today, no coat, hair down. The first time he'd seen it down. It changed something about her face, made her look less armored. Not younger exactly, but less deliberate. "You look different," he said before he could stop it. "I'm not at the office," she said. "I look different when I'm not at the office." You were at the office this morning?" "I'm always at the office in the morning." She turned her cup. "I had a board call at 7. I left at 11 to come here." A pause. "Which I don't usually do." "Take a lunch? Leave the building before 2. She said it plainly, without making it a confession, just an inventory of her own habits. His coffee arrived. He wrapped both hands around it because the damp had gotten into his fingers. "So why today?" She looked at him. "Because you were going to be here." He held her gaze. She didn't look away from it, which he was starting to understand was just how she was. She didn't flinch from things, didn't dress them up. She said them and let them sit. "I've been thinking about what you said," she said, "at the restaurant, about confusing effort with love." "What about it?" "I've done the same thing. Inverted." She turned the cup again. "I've mistaken distance for control. Told myself that if I managed everything carefully enough, who had access to me, what I let myself want, I wouldn't be exposed to anything I couldn't handle." A pause. "I've been managing myself for so long, I'm not sure I know what I actually want anymore." "What do you mean?" She was quiet for a moment, the kind of quiet that meant she was choosing words rather than gathering courage. "I mean that I made my company my whole life because it was the one thing that couldn't leave. It couldn't decide I was too difficult. It couldn't grow tired of me." Her jaw shifted slightly. "It requires everything I have, and it gives back in the only currency I know how to receive, which is results. And I've confused that for 20 years with being fine." "Are you?" "No," she said, without any particular drama around it. "I'm competent and lonely, which is a very specific combination that looks like success from the outside." Nathan looked at her. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because you asked the right question last week." She met his eyes. "When you asked if I trusted myself personally, and I answered honestly, which I don't do often, and I've been," she stopped, "unsettled by it. Since the restaurant." "Unsettled how?" "Like something that's been locked got opened. And now I can't figure out where I left the key." He set down his coffee. "Victoria, can I say something that might be unwelcome?" "Yes." "You've been alone so long you've started talking about yourself like you're a building that needs managing." He said it quietly, no edge in it. "Like the goal is maintenance. Keep the structure sound. Don't let anything deteriorate. You're not a building." She looked at him for a long moment. Something moved behind her eyes. Not offense, not exactly. More like recognition of something she didn't want to recognize. "That's an inconvenient observation," she said. "I know. It's also probably accurate." "I know that too." She picked up her cup, drank, set it down. "Tell me about your work," she said, which he recognized as a redirect but let go because she'd been honest enough for one afternoon. He talked about the firm, mid-sized risk consulting, nothing glamorous, the kind of work that required precision and patience and an ability to tell clients things they didn't want to hear without losing the relationship in the process. He described his boss, Gerald, who was fair and colorless, and ran the department with the bureaucratic efficiency of a man who'd never had an unpredictable day in his professional life. "Do you like it?" Victoria asked. "It pays well and I'm good at it." "That's not what I asked." He paused. "I used to like it more. When Maisie was smaller and I was running on no sleep, the predictability was something I needed. Gerald never asks anything unexpected. The work has rules I can follow." He turned his cup. "Now, I think I might have stayed past the point where it's the right fit, but the timing has never been—" He stopped. "You're afraid to risk stability because Maisie needs it," Victoria said. "Yeah, I did the same thing." She said it like she was reading a pattern she'd seen before. "Stayed in decisions past their expiration because the cost of change felt too high. Told myself I was being responsible." A slight pause. "Sometimes you are, and sometimes you're just afraid. How do you know which one it is?" "You usually do know. You're just hoping you're wrong." He looked at her. "Do you always cut through things this fast?" "It's a professional habit." A slight tension around her mouth. "I've been told it's not endearing in personal settings." "By who?" She looked at her cup. "Various people who didn't stay long enough for it to stop mattering." The rain was coming down properly now, running in sheets down the front window of Brackish, and the coffee shop had gone warm and close with other people's quiet afternoons. Somewhere near the front, someone was playing something acoustic and low. "My ex-husband said I was like working with someone who only spoke one language," Victoria said, not looking at him. "Efficient, useful, but fundamentally not built for anything that required translation." "How long were you married?" 11 years. 14 if you count the years we stayed in the same house for the sake of appearances." Her voice was entirely flat. Not the flatness of someone who didn't feel it, the flatness of someone who'd spent a long time making it flat. "We were very good at appearances." "What happened?" "He found someone who wasn't efficient." She said it without bitterness. "Someone who needed him. I didn't need him, or at least I never let him see that I did, and eventually he stopped trying to be needed." A pause. "Claire was 12 when he left." Nathan was quiet. "She blamed me," Victoria said. "Not directly. Claire doesn't do things directly. But she learned from it. That love is something that leaves. That the people who are supposed to stay are the ones most likely to go." She looked up at him then, and her eyes were entirely clear, which somehow made it more difficult to look at. "And then she married you, and you were exactly what you appear to be. A man who was going to stay, who was going to try. And she couldn't believe it. So she made it fail before it could." Nathan didn't say anything for a long time. Outside the rain, inside the murmur of the room. "I spent 3 years angry at her," he said eventually. "Not openly. I don't carry things outwardly, but under everything. This low level of it." He looked at the table. "Maisie would do something that reminded me of Claire, and I'd feel it. That's not something to apologize for." "I know. I'm not apologizing." He looked up. "I'm just saying I understand it better now, what she came from." He wasn't sure what he was asking. "Does that bother you, that I talk about her this way?" "No." Victoria's voice was even. "She's my daughter, and I love her, and she's caused tremendous damage to people who didn't deserve it, including you and including her own child. Both things are true." A pause. "I spent a long time only being able to hold one of them at a time." "Can you hold both now?" She considered it. "Getting there." After that, Thursday became something. Not officially. There was no agreed frequency, no stated thing between them. But the week after Brackish, she texted him on a Wednesday. "Same place, noon, if you're free." And he was free, or he made himself free, which was different but produced the same result. They kept going. Some weeks it was coffee. One week it was a walk when the weather surprised them both by being decent. They walked 6 blocks east and 6 blocks back without planning to, talking the whole way. And he arrived home that afternoon with wet shoes and the distinct feeling of a man who'd been somewhere without noticing he was going. He told Daniel in the blunt way of a man who didn't want to discuss it at length. "I've been meeting with Victoria Ashbourne for coffee." He sent it and put his phone face down, but Daniel called instead of texting because Daniel was like that. "Victoria Ashbourne," Daniel said. "Your ex-wife's—" I know who she is. I'm not, I'm not judging. I'm processing. A pause. What's happening? I don't know, Nathan said honestly. We talk. It's different than I thought. She's different. Different how? She's honest. In a way I didn't expect. He was standing at his kitchen window again, the one that looked out at the alley and the back of the dry cleaners across the way. She doesn't perform. She just says what's there. A long pause from Daniel. Do you? I don't know, Nathan said again. That's the honest answer. I don't know what this is, but it doesn't feel like nothing. Daniel was quiet. Not judgment quiet. Processing quiet. Is she good to you? Yeah, in her way. He paused. She's not easy. She doesn't comfort you exactly, but she tells you the truth and she doesn't sugarcoat it, and I've been so tired of things being sugarcoated. What does she get out of it? The same thing, I think. Someone who's not performing. He watched a pigeon investigate the fire escape rail across the alley. She's been alone a long time. Nathan, Daniel said carefully, you know the history. I know. It's complicated. I know that too. He turned from the window. I'm not saying it isn't. I'm saying it also doesn't feel like nothing. And I spent 3 years feeling like nothing, and I'm not going to throw it out because it doesn't come in the expected shape. A pause. Then Daniel, quieter. Okay. Yeah, okay. That's all I wanted. Daniel stopped himself. Is she good with Maisie? In terms of, does Maisie know? Maisie doesn't know anything. She's 4. Victoria and I have coffee and talk. He said it clearly. That's all this is right now. Right. A beat. But nothing. It's what it is. It wasn't nothing. He knew that already. The evening he came closest to admitting it to himself was a Wednesday in November, 3 weeks after Brackish. They'd moved their meeting to a quieter cafe this time, a place near his office that did sandwiches and had better light. Victoria had been in back-to-back calls until 11:30 and arrived looking like someone who had been in back-to-back calls until 11:30. Not disheveled, that wasn't her, but tighter around the jaw. Something in her eyes that was running hot. Bad morning? He asked. Manageable morning. She sat down. I've been dealing with a situation at the company. One of my senior managers has been undermining decisions I made in Q3 and attributing the results to a different project to make his own numbers look better. She said it quietly, controlled, but he could see the effort. It's not the first time. It's the first time I have enough documentation to address it directly. What are you going to do? Formal performance review, documentation trail, eventual separation if nothing changes. She ordered water without looking at the menu. What I'm required to do is what I'm doing. What I'd prefer to do. She stopped herself. What would you prefer? Walk into his office and tell him exactly what I know and exactly what I think of him. A pause. But I've been doing this long enough to know that's not how you protect a case. Is that what you're building? A case? You have to build them in corporate environments. You can't just act on what you know. You have to produce the architecture of proof so that when you do act, nothing collapses. She looked at her hands. It's exhausting, knowing something and having to engineer the conditions under which you're allowed to act on it. You're doing it, though. You're not ignoring it. I'm not capable of ignoring things, she said. It's not a virtue. It's a compulsion. She looked up at him. How do you handle it? When you know something at work that you can't act on yet? I write it down, he said. Everything I know in order with dates. And then I close the document and try to live normally until I can use it. Otherwise, it just circles. She nodded slowly. I circle. I know. I can tell. She looked at him sharply. Can you? You've been circling since you sat down. You keep coming back to the same point in the sentence and then rerouting. He said it without any particular force. You don't have to, with me. You can just say what you're actually thinking. A long pause. I don't trust him, she said, not just as an employee. I think he's been talking to people on the board, positioning. I think this is bigger than the Q3 numbers, and I think I haven't located the edges of it yet. Her voice was even, but her hands were flat on the table in a way that told him what her voice was hiding. And I can't share that concern with anyone at the company because I can't afford to signal weakness before I know how deep this goes. Can you share it with people outside the company? She looked at him. I'm sharing it with you. I know, he said. That's why I asked. She didn't say anything for a moment, just looked at him with that measuring thing she did, the assessment, and he'd stopped feeling appraised by it. He'd realized somewhere around week 3 that it wasn't appraisal. It was the way she checked whether a thing was real. This is strange, she said. Which part? This. She indicated the space between them. I'm not accustomed to having a person, someone outside the structure of my company and my professional life She stopped. Tried a different route. I've been very compartmentalized for a long time. Work in one box. Personal in another box, which was mostly empty. She said it dryly, but not without weight. You've become someone I talk to, in a way that isn't in a box. Is that bad? She looked at the table. It's unfamiliar, which is not the same thing. He leaned forward. Victoria, can I say something? You keep asking that. Because you keep looking like you might object. Say what you're going to say. I look forward to this. He said it plainly, the way she said things. Whatever this is, I look forward to it in a way I haven't looked forward to anything in a while. And I think you do too. And I'm not suggesting we name it or do anything about it. I'm just saying it's real. You don't have to put it in a box. She was quiet. The cafe around them kept its ordinary life. Someone ordering at the counter, a phone buzzing on a table nearby, the sound of the machine hissing steam. I've been very careful, she said, about not wanting things I can't categorize. I know, he said. I've been the same way. She looked at him. This is complicated, Nathan, structurally. I know that too. You were married to my daughter. I know who I was married to. People will say things, he said. They always do. That's not the same as them being right. He held her gaze. I'm not saying jump. I'm saying stop running from the ledge. A silence. Victoria looked at her water glass, then out the window at the gray November street, then back at him. My daughter is not going to like this, she said finally. It wasn't a no. They both heard it. We'll manage that when there's something to manage, he said. She looked at him for a long moment, and then she picked up her water and drank and set it back down and said, Tell me what Maisie did this week, in the voice of someone deliberately changing subjects. But her shoulders had dropped by half an inch, and the tightness around her jaw had released, and she was listening before he'd even started talking. He told her about Maisie, the rabbit, the insistence on wearing her rain boots to bed as a precaution, the questions about whether fish dreamed. Victoria listened with her whole attention, the way she did everything, completely, without distraction. And at one point, when he described Maisie explaining to him with total seriousness that fish probably didn't dream because they didn't have pillows, Victoria laughed. Fully, briefly, with her head tipped back and her guard completely gone for about 4 seconds. Then she straightened, picked up her water, looked at the table, but her eyes were still warm when she looked back up at him, and that warmth didn't leave for the rest of the hour. He drove home that evening through the gray city and the early dark of November and thought about the specific quality of those 4 seconds, the way she'd looked without the management, without the careful distance. He thought about what she'd said. You've become someone I talk to. He thought about Maisie's rain boots and Claire's dark eyes, and 3 years of suspension, and the way, somehow, the most unlikely person he could have imagined had become the thing that made the week feel like it had something in it. He didn't know where it was going. He wasn't sure it needed to go anywhere yet. But when he got home and Carol had already put Maisie to sleep and the apartment was quiet, he stood in the kitchen and didn't feel the silence the way he used to. It was still just him in the kitchen. Still just his life, ordinary and imperfect and demanding. But something had shifted. Not dramatically, not cleanly, just shifted. The way a room feels different when someone has recently been in it, even if the furniture hasn't moved. He made himself a coffee he didn't need, sat at the kitchen table, didn't check his phone. He just sat there and felt the strange, fragile, slightly terrifying sensation of a man who might, against all logic and expectation, be all right. The situation at Ashbourne Strategic Group got worse before Victoria told him how bad it actually was. He'd noticed it in increments. The way her texts came later on certain evenings, the way she'd arrive at their Thursday coffees already depleted, like someone who'd been fighting something all morning and was only now setting down the weight of it. She didn't complain. That wasn't her. But she'd grown quieter in certain directions, and Nathan had learned enough about her silences to know the difference between the quiet of a woman who had nothing to say and the quiet of a woman managing something she hadn't decided to share yet. It was a Thursday in late November when she sat down across from him and didn't reach for the menu and didn't ask about Maisie, and he knew before she opened her mouth that whatever had been building had broken into something. "Tell me," he said. She looked up. "I haven't said anything yet." "Tell me anyway." She wrapped both hands around her coffee cup. The board called a special session Monday. Marcus, the senior manager I told you about, he'd been building a case, not just against individual decisions, against my leadership overall. She said it steadily, but her knuckles were pale against the cup. He'd been collecting statements, getting junior staff to document things out of context, framing the Q3 losses as evidence of systemic mismanagement rather than a calculated risk that didn't pay off. A pause. He presented it to 3 board members before I knew there was a meeting. "That's a coup," Nathan said quietly. "It's an attempt at one." She lifted her eyes to his. "The board isn't moving against me. Not yet. But 2 of the 3 members he approached are people I've had friction with in the past, and they're using this as leverage to push for an external audit of leadership decisions over the last 18 months. Which means everything I've done in the last year and a half goes under a microscope. Every call I made, every person I hired or let go, every contract." She exhaled slowly. "Including some decisions that involved your firm." He went still. "Which ones?" "The risk assessment contract we brought in for the Delmar account. That was handled through your company. You weren't the lead on it. Gerald ran the engagement, but your name is in the documentation as secondary reviewer." She met his eyes directly. "If Marcus shapes the narrative correctly, it could look like I favored a firm with a personal connection to the CEO, even though the contract predates any—" She stopped. "Any of this." "The contract was awarded before we ever spoke at that restaurant," Nathan said. "I know that. There's no actual conflict of interest." "I know that too." Her jaw set. "But Marcus doesn't need an actual conflict. He needs a credible-looking one. And your name in my files, combined with whatever he's already told the board about my judgment. He knows about us? I don't know what he knows. I know that people talk, and my assistant mentioned seeing us at Brackish in October, which at the time was completely unremarkable. But now—" She stopped herself. "I don't know how much he's found or how much he's shaped." Nathan sat with it. Outside, November was doing what November did. Gray, relentless, the kind of sky that wasn't dramatic enough to be interesting and just wore you down. He thought about Gerald, about the Delmar contract, about his name in a file somewhere being read by someone looking for the wrong thing. "What happens if they audit and find nothing actionable?" he asked. "Then I survive it, and Marcus loses standing and probably leaves within the year." Her voice was flat. "But the audit itself does damage. There will be speculation. There will be people at the firm who wonder if the questions had merit. That kind of shadow doesn't fully lift. And if they find something they can make look actionable?" She didn't answer that directly, just turned her cup. "I want to be clear about something," she said. "I'm not telling you this to involve you. I'm telling you because you deserve to know your name is in documents that are currently being handled by people who aren't looking to be fair." "What can I do?" "Nothing right now. That's why I didn't tell you earlier." She looked at him. "I didn't want you worried about something you couldn't affect." "That's not your call." "I know." She said it without argument. "It was the wrong instinct. I do that. I manage information to protect people from anxiety, and they don't always want to be managed." A slight pause. "You definitely don't want to be managed." "No, I don't." He held her gaze. "Don't do that again. Whatever you're dealing with, I want to know." She studied him. "Even when it involves you directly. Especially then." A long silence. The cafe around them kept its ambient life, indifferent to the weight of their table. "All right," she said. Just that. But he heard what it cost her to say it, and he thought it might be one of the more significant things she'd given him so far. The board's external audit began the first week of December. Nathan knew because Victoria texted him the morning it started. Not a long message, just, "It's begun. I'm fine. Don't worry." Which was exactly the kind of message designed to produce worry. And he told her so, and she replied, "I know. I said it anyway." He followed it the way you follow something you can't act on. Reading between lines, tracking her mood across their conversations, noticing when she went short and clipped versus when she came to their Thursday meetings genuinely present. The audit had 3 external reviewers brought in by the board. She didn't know them. That was either good or bad, and depended entirely on whether Marcus had gotten to them first. At the firm, Nathan said nothing. Gerald didn't bring it up. The Delmar contract had been clean. Nathan had run his portion by the book, documented everything with the particular care he gave all his work, and he could only wait to see if clean was going to be enough. What made it harder was that he and Victoria were still meeting, still texting. And he was aware, in a way he hadn't had to be before, of the specific complicated shape of what this was. A man whose name was in her files. A woman being investigated for decisions that included those files. Whatever they were to each other now, it looked like exactly what Marcus needed it to look like. He said that to her, directly, on a Tuesday evening when she called instead of texting. She'd been doing that more lately. Calling. He'd noticed it as a shift. She was more herself on the phone than in text. Something about writing made her more formal. Speaking let her be imprecise in ways she couldn't permit herself on a screen. "I've thought about it," she said when he laid it out. "About what it looks like for you to be in contact with me during this. And I won't ask you to stop." Her voice was measured. "Not because I need you. I can handle this alone. I have handled things alone for 20 years. But because asking you to disappear for the sake of optics would be the kind of thing I do when I'm afraid. And I'm trying to be better about that. You don't have to try on my behalf." "I'm not. I'm trying on my own." A pause. "But it's easier when you're watching." He was quiet for a moment. His kitchen at 11 at night, Maisie long asleep, the dishwasher running its cycle in the background. Ordinary sounds of an ordinary life. "Victoria," he said. "Don't." "I haven't said anything yet." "You were going to say something that would make this more complicated." "Maybe." He leaned against the counter. "What if I said it anyway?" A silence. Not hostile. Waiting. "I care about what happens to you," he said. "Not as a situation to manage. Not as a problem I'm invested in because my name's in the file. I care about you." He said it simply, without building anything around it. "I thought you should know, in case you were accounting for it." A longer silence. "Nathan." Her voice was different, lower, careful, like someone opening a door they weren't sure about. "I don't know how to do this." "Neither do I." "That's not comforting." "I know. I'm being honest instead." Another pause. He heard her exhale. Long, slow, the breath of someone releasing something they'd been holding compressed. "I do know," she said. "In case you were wondering, what this is, I know. I just don't have experience with knowing and not—" She stopped. "Not controlling what happens next," he said. "Yes." "Neither do I," he said again. "We cannot control it together. That seems like a reasonable approach." She was quiet. He could hear the ambient sounds of wherever she was. Her apartment, he imagined. That clean-lined kitchen, sitting on a countertop maybe, or standing at a window that looked out at a city view that probably cost more per square foot than his entire building. "Okay," she said. Just that. Small word. Everything in it. "Okay," he said back. The thing that broke the audit open wasn't what either of them expected. 3 weeks into December, one of the external reviewers, a woman named Candace Holt, who ran a compliance consultancy out of the financial district and had done 3 other board-commissioned reviews that year, asked to speak with Victoria privately. Not in the formal review sessions, outside of those. Candace Holt had 15 years reading corporate governance, and she'd found the shape of what Marcus was doing approximately 4 days into the review. Victoria told Nathan about it on the phone that same evening, and he could hear something different in her voice. Not relief, not yet, but the particular quality of someone who'd been braced for a blow and felt the angle shift. She asked me directly whether the decisions I'd made in Q3 had been documented in real time or reconstructed, Victoria said, which meant she already suspected the latter was what Marcus had claimed. I showed her the original memos, dated, unaltered. A pause. She didn't say much, but the way she looked at the documents— She believed you, Nathan said. She was assessing. There's a difference. A beat. But yes, I think she believed me. What about your name in the files? The Delmar contract? She pulled it herself, reviewed the timeline. Victoria's voice was flat but controlled. She could see the contract award date. She didn't ask me about you directly, but she asked about the selection process for external risk partners in general. I answered everything. A pause. I told her the truth about all of it. Including us? There was no version of me that was going to obscure that, Nathan. If she asked, I was going to tell her. She didn't ask because the contract timeline made the question irrelevant. Victoria paused. But if she had asked, I would have told her. He sat with that for a moment, the quiet straightforwardness of it. No hedging, no calculation about what to reveal and what to protect. Just, I would have told her. That could have hurt you, he said. Yes. You were going to do it anyway. Honesty isn't selective, she said, or it isn't actually honesty. He looked at the ceiling. Victoria. What? You know that's not how most people operate. I'm aware. A pause. My former deputy operated differently. He was very selective about his honesty and very good at making it look complete. I watched him do it for 4 years before I caught him. Something hard in her voice for a moment, and then it passed. I decided a long time ago I didn't want to be good at that. The review continued through Christmas. Victoria worked through it without complaint, without the kind of visible distress that might have been more understandable. She answered every question Candace Holt's team put to her. She provided documentation. She did not attempt to shape the narrative or get ahead of it. She just produced the record and let it speak. Nathan watched this from the outside and thought about what it actually cost. He'd been in enough corporate environments to know that most people in Victoria's position would have had lawyers present for every session, would have controlled access, would have fed the reviewers a careful version of events. Victoria gave them the version. The whole version. Including the Q3 calls that hadn't paid off, which she described plainly as calculated risks she stood behind, and 2 personnel decisions earlier in the year that she admitted in retrospect she'd handled poorly. Why tell them about the ones you got wrong? He asked her. They might not have found those. They would have found them, and if they'd found them without me acknowledging them first, it would look like I was hiding something. She was quiet a moment. Besides, I did handle them poorly. I moved too fast on the Kerr account, and it cost 2 good people their positions when it shouldn't have. Pretending otherwise wouldn't change that. Most people in your position would pretend otherwise. I know. A pause. I used to. Early on, I was very good at making my mistakes look like strategy. She said it with a kind of dry self-assessment. Then I got tired of carrying the weight of the alternate version. It's exhausting, maintaining a cleaner story than what actually happened. It never matches up at the edges. Marcus made his move in the second week of January. Nathan was at his desk when Victoria's message came in. He told the board this morning that you and I are in a relationship and that the Delmar contract was awarded as a personal favor. He has a photograph. Nathan read it twice. What photograph? Brackish. October. You and I at the table. Someone sold it or gave it to him. I don't know who. A pause. Then, it looks like what he wants it to look like. He thought about the coffee shop, the narrow room, the rain outside, the first time they'd sat across from each other without the restaurant's formality around them. Someone had been there with a phone. He typed, "What are you going to do?" Her reply took 4 minutes, which for Victoria was a long time. "I'm going to go into that boardroom and tell them everything. The photograph is accurate. We were there. I'm not going to pretend otherwise." Another message right behind it. I wanted to warn you first. Your firm's name will come up. He stared at his phone. Around him, the office continued its morning. Keyboards, a phone ringing 2 desks over, Gerald's voice somewhere down the hall on a call. He typed, "Do you need me to come?" Her reply, "No, this is mine to handle, but thank you." He put his phone down, picked it up again, put it down. He made himself sit there for 20 minutes without doing anything, which was the hardest 20 minutes he could remember in a long time. The helpless quality of it, knowing she was in a room he wasn't in, dealing with something that involved him, and having no role except to wait. At 11:43, she texted, "Done." He called immediately. She picked up on the second ring. The background was quiet. She'd stepped somewhere private, he guessed. A hallway. A car. "Tell me," he said. "I told them everything." Her voice was steady, but he could hear something underneath it. Not exhaustion, exactly. The particular quality of a woman who had just done something that cost her. "I told them about the restaurant in October, that we've been meeting regularly since, that we've become—" a slight pause at the word. "Close." Her voice didn't waver on it. "I told them the Delmar contract was awarded through a competitive selection process, that it predated any personal contact, that I had no personal connection to you at the time of the award, and that if they wanted Gerald's documentation on the selection process, I would have it to them by end of day. And Candace Holt had already looked at the contract timeline. She confirmed the timeline independently before I said a word about it." A pause. "It helped. What did Marcus do?" He sat there, a brief dark quality to her voice. His argument relied on the relationship being the reason for the contract. Without that, the photograph is just 2 people having coffee. She exhaled. "He's not done. He'll find another angle. But he lost today." Nathan leaned back in his chair. "Victoria." "I'm all right. I know you're all right. I'm not asking if you're all right." He paused. "You went in there and told them everything about us when you didn't have to." "I did have to. There were other ways. Not for me." Her voice was quiet now, stripped of the business register. Just her underneath all the armor. "I told you. I'm not good at the selective version, and I'm not going to start practicing it with something that matters." The word matters in that sentence. She'd put it there without fanfare, without underlining it, the way she said all the things that mattered most. Plainly, in the middle of something else, almost like she was hoping he'd notice without her having to point. He noticed. "What happens next?" he asked. "Candace Holt presents her findings to the full board next week. Based on what she said to me after the session, I think the findings will be inconclusive at worst. Insufficient evidence of systematic mismanagement. The Q3 losses are on record but defensible." She paused. "Marcus will be the question. The board will have to decide what to do with a senior manager who brought a bad faith case. Will you push for him to go?" "No." She said it without hesitation. "I'm going to let the board see what he did and make their own judgment. If I push for his removal, it looks like retaliation. If they remove him on the merits of what he did, it's governance." A pause. "I'm very tired of people assuming I want blood when I want process." "Do you want blood?" he asked. A beat. "A little," she admitted. "But I'm not going to have it." He felt something release in his chest. Something that had been compressed since her first text that morning. He looked at the ordinary office around him, the fluorescent light and the carpet tiles and Gerald's closed door down the hall, and felt the whole thing land. Marcus losing. Victoria in that room telling the truth with her name on the line and his name in the file, and her choosing honesty anyway. "Can I see you tonight?" he asked. A pause. Not hesitation, consideration. "Maisie's home?" she asked. "Carol can stay." Another pause. "I'll come to you. 7 o'clock. Something slightly unsteady in her voice, which was the first time he'd ever heard it. "I don't want to be alone with this tonight." "I know," he said. "Come." He sat at his desk after they hung up and stared at the middle distance for a while. He thought about October and Clements and 1 hour that became 3. He thought about the weight of 3 years he'd been carrying and the specific, unexpected way that weight had started to shift. He thought about what it meant that the most honest person he'd met in longer than he could remember was a 55-year-old CEO who'd spent 20 years learning to be lonely and was apparently, slowly, unlearning it in his direction. He thought about Maisie and her rain boots. He thought about complicated shapes. He thought about the fact that she'd said something that matters without pointing at it. He looked at the clock. It was not yet noon. 7 o'clock was a long way away. He went back to work. He had things to do, ordinary things, the daily mechanical reality of a life that kept moving regardless of what was shifting underneath it. He did them. He answered emails and took a call and reviewed a contract that had nothing to do with Ashbourne's strategic group and ate a sandwich at his desk at 1:30. He did all of it, and he felt underneath all of it the low persistent pull of 7 o'clock. The fact of her coming. The fact that she'd said she didn't want to be alone with it. He'd asked for no dramatic promises. He'd asked her to stop running from the ledge. She was coming to his apartment at 7. It wasn't a promise. It was something quieter than that. It was a woman who had spent 20 years alone choosing, for tonight, not to be. That was enough. That was more than enough. It was the kind of thing Nathan Holloway had stopped believing would happen to him, standing in the cold outside Clements 3 months ago, watching a car pull away into the October dark. The afternoon passed. The ordinary hours of an ordinary day, doing what days do. He left the office at 5:30, went home, relieved Carol, put Maisie in the bath and listened to her explain that rubber ducks probably had feelings and he should be careful not to drop them. Made dinner for one because Maisie ate at 5 and would be asleep before Victoria arrived, and left a plate covered on the stove anyway without fully thinking about it. At 6:58, his phone buzzed. Outside. He went to the door. She was standing in the hallway outside his door when he opened it, still in her work clothes from the boardroom. Charcoal blazer, dark trousers, heels she hadn't changed out of. She looked like someone who had driven straight here without stopping to become a different version of herself first. That, more than anything, told him what the day had cost her. "Hi," he said. "Hi." She looked at him for a moment, then passed him into the apartment. "She's asleep?" 20 minutes ago, she went down fast tonight. He stepped back. "Come in." She crossed the threshold with the careful awareness of someone entering a space they'd heard described but never seen. He watched her take it in, the lived-in quality of it, the shoes by the door, the coloring books fanned across the coffee table, the small pair of rain boots standing at attention beside the couch like sentinels. His apartment was clean but not staged. It looked like what it was, a place where a man was raising a child largely alone and doing a reasonable job of it without much room to spare. "It's smaller than I imagined," she said. "Is that a problem?" "No." She turned slightly. "It's warmer than I expected." She said it like she was reporting something that surprised her, which it clearly did. He took her coat. She stood in the middle of his living room and looked at the drawing on the refrigerator door, Maisie's current masterpiece, which appeared to be either a horse or a dog, or possibly a very enthusiastic cloud, executed in green crayon with total creative confidence. "She drew that Monday," Nathan said from the kitchen. "She told me it was a wolf." Victoria looked at it for another moment. "It's expressive," she said, which he thought was the most diplomatic assessment of a child's art he'd ever heard. He came back with 2 glasses of water because she hadn't asked for anything else, and he didn't want to assume, and she sat on the couch with the slightly careful posture of someone who wasn't sure where to put themselves. Not uncomfortable, exactly, just unfamiliar with the geography. He sat in the chair across from her, left the space. "Tell me how it actually went," he said. "Not the executive summary, the real version." She looked at her water glass. Marcus came in with the photograph already distributed to the 3 board members he'd been cultivating. He'd framed it in advance. Relationship between CEO and contracted vendor, ongoing and undisclosed, potential fiduciary breach. She said it with the flat precision she used when she was keeping something controlled. He was very prepared. He'd clearly been building this for weeks. "What did you do when you saw the photograph?" "I identified it as accurate and said so immediately." Her jaw shifted. Which I could see surprised him. He'd expected denial. A denial would have given him room to push, to produce more documentation, to build the conflict. I didn't give him that room. She paused. What I gave him instead was the truth, which turned out to be less useful to him than a lie would have been. Because the truth had a timeline that killed his argument. Yes. She turned her water glass. The contract was awarded 14 months before that photograph was taken, Candace Holt had already verified the selection records. Marcus had built his case on the assumption that the personal relationship preceded the business one, and the dates made that impossible to argue. A pause. He tried. He suggested the relationship was older than I was admitting, that the photograph was evidence of an established pattern, not a recent development. What did you say? I told him I'd met you 3 years before at your wedding to my daughter, that we had no meaningful contact during your marriage or following your divorce, that we encountered each other again by coincidence in October of last year and had developed a friendship since. She said it without flinching. I answered every question they put to me. I didn't volunteer what wasn't asked, but I didn't obscure what was. And the board? 2 of Marcus's 3 allies went quiet when the timeline held. The third asked me directly whether the relationship was ongoing in a personal sense. She looked at him. I said yes. I said it was recent, that it existed entirely outside of any business context, and that I had not and would not make any professional decisions on the basis of it. A pause. Then I said that if there were further questions about the Delmar contract specifically, Gerald Watts at Nathan Holloway's firm could provide complete documentation of the selection process, since he'd run it. Did they say anything to that? One of them wrote Gerald's name down. Her mouth tightened slightly. I'm sorry about that. I'll contact Gerald tomorrow and explain what's happening, give him the chance to prepare. I'll call him tonight, Nathan said. He should hear it from me first. She looked at him. Something moved in her expression, not quite relief, but the specific quality of someone who's been holding a weight alone and has been, unexpectedly, offered a share of it. You don't have to. He's my boss. It should come from me. He held her gaze. Stop protecting me from things I can handle. A silence. She looked at him with that careful attention she gave to things she was actually seeing. I know, she said. I do that. I've been doing it less. A little less, he allowed. The apartment was quiet around them. The building doing its nighttime sounds, a pipe somewhere, the elevator in the lobby, the particular compressed quiet of a city that never went fully silent. Nathan sat with the reality of her in his living room and thought about how strange it was that this felt almost ordinary. This woman in his space, in his mismatched furniture, with his daughter's wolf drawing on the refrigerator door. How are you? He asked. Not the situation. You. She thought about it, which he'd learned was real. She didn't give reflexive answers to direct questions. Tired, she said. Not from today, from the last 6 weeks of carrying this. A pause. And something else. Something I don't have a clean word for. Like having braced for a fall and not falling. The muscles are still tense. That takes time to release. I know. She looked at her hands. I don't relax easily. I noticed. She almost smiled. Is it that obvious? Only to someone paying attention. She was quiet again. The tiredness was real and visible in her face in a way she'd never have allowed in a professional context. Not breakdown tiredness, nothing dramatic, just the honest depletion of someone who'd been running at capacity for weeks and had finally stopped moving. Her shoulders were down. Her jaw had unclenched. Can I tell you something? She said. Always. She turned slightly toward him. When I walked into that boardroom today and Marcus put that photograph on the table, my first instinct was damage control, years of conditioning. Find the angle that minimizes exposure, build the wall, protect the structure. She looked at the middle distance. And then I thought about what you said, about the alternate version being exhausting, about maintaining a cleaner story than what happened. Her voice dropped slightly. And I just didn't. I thought, it happened. We meet for coffee, and it matters. And the photograph is accurate, and I'm not going to spend energy pretending otherwise. How did that feel? Terrifying. And then she paused. Lighter. After. Like I'd been carrying the wrong thing. He looked at her for a long moment. The lamp beside the couch was casting warm light on her face, and she looked less armored than he'd ever seen her. Not vulnerable, in a fragile sense. Nothing about Victoria was fragile, but real. Unperformed. The version she was when there was no one left to manage. I've been afraid, she said, and the words came slowly, like she was identifying them as she spoke. I don't usually say that. I don't usually identify it as that, even to myself. She looked at him. When you told me in October that you'd been carrying the blame for your marriage for 3 years, I recognized it. I'd been carrying things too, just differently. If I stayed ahead of everything, if I moved fast enough and managed enough, nothing could come at me sideways. She stopped. But Marcus came at me sideways anyway, and it turned out the thing that helped me most was just telling the truth, which I could have been doing for years. You are telling the truth, Nathan said. You've been telling it to me since October. She looked at him. I know, that's what I mean. Her voice was quieter now. You happened at a strange time, in a strange way. And I kept waiting for the reason it wouldn't work, for the thing that would make it sensible to stop. Did you find it? Several reasons, she said. My daughter's name, your daughter's well-being, the age difference, the professional entanglement, the complete improbability of the whole thing from start to finish. She paused. They're all real. None of them changed anything. Nathan stood up, crossed the room and sat beside her on the couch, not close enough to crowd her, but close enough that the distance between them was a choice rather than a default. She turned to look at him. He could see the specific effort of someone who was not going to look away. I spent 3 years making myself small, he said. Not consciously, but I got so focused on being what Maisie needed, on keeping things steady, that I stopped taking up any space for myself. And I told myself that was good parenting, and maybe some of it was, but some of it was just fear. That if I wanted something for myself and it went wrong, I wouldn't have anything left. You're telling me this because I want something for myself, he said. And I'm not going to call it something else or wait until it comes in a simpler shape. It doesn't come in a simpler shape. This is the shape it comes in. She was very still. Victoria. He said her name the way he'd learned to say it, without the formal distance it used to carry. Just her name, like a thing that belonged in his mouth. I'm not asking you to be easy. I'm not asking for smooth or uncomplicated. I'm asking for real, whatever that is. She looked at him for a long time. He could see the work of it. Not indecision, she was never indecisive. The work of letting something in rather than assessing it from the outside. I've been betrayed, she said. Specifically, my ex-husband, a partner I trusted at the company in the early years who took what I built and tried to claim it. Claire, in the way children betray you when they become the worst version of what you were afraid of. Her voice was even, but her hands were still, and still was how Victoria held things that moved her. I got very good at leaving before I could be left, ending things on my terms before someone else could end them on theirs. I know, Nathan said. I'm afraid that I'll do it again, she said, and it came out of her like something that had cost real effort to produce. That I'll feel this getting real, and I'll find a reason. Make it sensible. Tell myself there were too many complications. She looked at him. I don't want to do that. I'm telling you because I think if I say it out loud, it becomes something I have to account for. Then I'll hold you to it, he said. When you start to pull back, I'll tell you what I see. You can decide what to do with it. You'll be able to tell. I can already tell, he said. I could tell in October. I could tell when you ordered a double gin and tonic before we'd said 20 words. Something cracked in her expression. Not broke, cracked, the way ice cracks in late winter when the temperature starts to shift and the whole surface readjusts. She looked at him with something completely unguarded, and it lasted only a few seconds, but he caught it and held it. That specific look of a person who has been seen clearly and is still sitting there. I don't know how to do this, she said again. Third time. He'd been counting without meaning to. I know, he said. Me neither. We've established that. It's not comforting. I know that too. He looked at her. But you came here tonight instead of going home and managing it alone. That's different from what you'd have done in September. She was quiet. Outside, a car moved past on the street below, its headlights sweeping briefly across the ceiling. Maisie's wolf drawing caught the light for a moment. I'm not good at asking for things, Victoria said. You're getting better. Am I? You texted me this morning the minute it started. You called when it was done. You came here at 7 o'clock. He paused. You didn't do any of that because it was efficient. She looked at her hands. No, she said. I didn't. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It had weight and texture and the specific quality of two people who had run out of the things they were holding back. He reached over and put his hand over hers, where they were still on her lap. She didn't pull away. She looked at his hand for a moment, and then she turned her hand over under his, and that was all, just that. Her palm against his, the small specific warmth of it. They sat like that for a while, the apartment around them, the city outside, Maisie dreaming in her room. Can I ask you something? Nathan said. Yes. What did you want to be before the company? She looked up. What? Before Ashbourne Strategic, before you knew that was what your life was going to be, what did you want? She seemed genuinely surprised by the question. He watched her go back somewhere she didn't go often. I wanted to write, she said. Academic writing. I did my graduate work in organizational psychology. I thought I was going to be a researcher, study how institutions behave under pressure. A pause. And then the opportunity came to build something instead of study it, and I chose building, and I never looked back. She turned her head slightly. That's not regret. I chose well, but I read research papers when I can't sleep, which is often. Organizational psychology, he said. So you've spent your whole career watching how institutions behave under pressure, and now someone's doing it to your institution. Ironic, she said dryly. I've noted it. What would the researcher version of you say about how you've handled it? She thought about it, genuinely. She'd say the decision to prioritize transparency over self-protection in the audit was sound strategy that also happened to be ethically consistent. A pause. She'd say the emotional cost was higher than anticipated, and that the subject should have asked for support sooner. She looked at him sideways. She'd note that the subject did eventually ask, belatedly. Better late than never, Nathan said. That's what the researcher would conclude. Yes. He squeezed her hand slightly without thinking about it. She didn't pull away. If anything, she settled fractionally, a slight easing in her posture, the last of the boardroom tension leaving her shoulders. Stay for a while, he said. You don't have to go. It's a weeknight. I know what night it is. She looked at him, then at the apartment, then at the wolf on the refrigerator. I'll stay for another hour, she said. The hour stretched to 2, then past 2. At some point she took her heels off, which she did without comment, and tucked her feet under her with the unconscious ease of someone who'd forgotten to be careful. He made tea she didn't ask for, and she accepted it without ceremony. They talked about things that weren't the boardroom, a book she'd read over the weekend about the psychology of institutional collapse, a problem at Maisie's school involving a disagreement over who owned the blue crayon, his mother in Cincinnati who called every Sunday and asked pointed questions he answered carefully. She knows about you, he said. My mother. Victoria looked at him. What did you tell her? I told her I'd met someone, that it was complicated, that she would have opinions and I was asking her to hold them. What were her opinions? She said complicated usually means worth it and she'd wait. He paused. She's a practical woman. Victoria was quiet for a moment. What will you tell her now? The truth, he said. Same as always. Around midnight she'd stood to go, and he got her coat, and she put it on in his hallway with its row of hooks. His coat, Maisie's small yellow raincoat, a scarf he'd been looking for 2 weeks hanging in plain sight. She looked at the yellow raincoat for a second. She's all right? Victoria asked. Maisie, she's doing all right? She's great, he said. She's actually really great. Victoria nodded. Her hand went briefly to the yellow raincoat, not quite touching it, then dropped. I'd like to... She started and then stopped. He waited. Eventually, she said carefully, I'd like to meet her, properly. If you think that's something that could work. She said it the way she said things that cost her, plainly and without armor. I understand if the timing isn't... The timing will need to be right, he said, and we'll know when it is. He looked at her. But yes, I think it's something that could work. She nodded again, once, looked at him. He kissed her. He did it without announcement, without building to it, just leaned in and let his mouth touch hers, brief and unhurried. The kind of kiss that isn't about momentum, but about being sure of a thing. She was still for a half second, and then she wasn't. She kissed him back with the specific quietness of someone who had been waiting to do something and was finally doing it without the waiting around it. When they separated, she stood very still for a moment with her eyes closed, and he thought again about what it cost her, all of it, the boardroom and the truth and the photograph and this. The remarkable quantity of things she'd given today that she didn't give easily. She opened her eyes. "Good night, Nathan. Good night, Victoria." She went. He stood in his doorway and listened to her footsteps in the hall, the elevator, and then silence. He went back into the apartment and stood in the kitchen for a while, not doing anything in particular. The tea mugs on the counter, the two impressions on the couch cushions where they'd been sitting, the yellow raincoat on its hook. He didn't feel suspended, hadn't felt that in a while, now that he thought about it. He felt like a man standing in his own kitchen at midnight, tired in the reasonable way of someone who'd had a full day, with a daughter asleep down the hall and someone he cared about in a car on her way home across the city. He turned off the kitchen light. He'd call Gerald in the morning. He'd handle whatever came from the board. He'd make Maisie's lunch and drive her to school and come back and do the work of his ordinary life, which was real and imperfect, and asked everything of him and gave back proportionally. And somewhere in it, not cleanly, not on a schedule, in the complicated way real things actually happened, something was beginning that he didn't have a clean word for either. He didn't need one yet. He went to bed. Outside, the city kept its lights on, indifferent and constant, doing what cities do. For the first time in longer than he could remember, the dark felt like something he could sleep in. Candace Holt delivered her findings to the full board on a Thursday morning in the second week of January, which meant Nathan spent the entire day at his desk doing work he couldn't fully concentrate on, while his phone sat face up beside his keyboard for the first time in his professional life. Gerald had taken the call well, better than Nathan had expected. He was a contained man who didn't rattle easily, and when Nathan had explained the situation, the audit, the Delmar contract, his name in the documentation, Gerald had listened without interrupting and then said, in his flat, reasonable way, that the contract record was clean, that he'd run the selection process himself and documented every step, and that if the board's reviewers wanted to talk to him, he'd make himself available. He'd asked Nathan one question: "Is this going to be a problem for the firm?" Nathan had said he didn't think so. Gerald had said all right and hung up. And that was the entirety of that conversation, which was both a relief and a small reminder of what Nathan had said to Victoria about the appeal of predictability. She texted him at 11:47. Candace presented. "I'm not in the room. Waiting." He typed back, "How are you?" Her reply? Competent and nervous, which is a combination I don't usually admit to. "You're admitting it to me." A pause. Then, "Yes, I am." He stared at that for a moment, then put his phone down and tried to read the contract in front of him, which he'd been trying to read for 40 minutes. At 1:15, she called. He picked up before the second ring. "Tell me." Insufficient evidence of systematic mismanagement. Her voice was controlled, but there was something underneath it, the specific tremor of relief in a person who doesn't show relief. The Q3 losses are documented as calculated risk, defensible on the basis of information available at the time of decision. The Delmar contract, clean, no conflict of interest established. A pause. Marcus is being placed on administrative review pending a separate HR investigation into the methods he used to build his case. They're going after him. The board is, not at my request. She said it with quiet precision. Apparently bringing a bad faith governance case against a sitting CEO using manufactured context is something boards take seriously when they look at it clearly. Who knew? What happens now? "Now I go back to running my company," she said, "which I've been doing through all of this, so the transition shouldn't be difficult." A pause that had something more personal in it. "And now I let myself feel this. The other thing, without waiting for the next thing to go wrong." He leaned back in his chair. "That's new." "I'm working on new," she said. "It's slow. I've noticed." Something almost a laugh from her end. Not quite, but close. "I'll call you tonight. I'll be here." February arrived and the city shifted slightly. Not warm, nothing that generous, but the particular quality of winter changing its mind incrementally. Nathan noticed it the morning he walked Maisie to school, and she didn't complain about the cold for the first time in 2 months, just skipped ahead of him on the sidewalk in her yellow raincoat, narrating something to herself about what she intended to do at recess. Things had found their shape, in the way things do when you stop trying to force them into one. He and Victoria had settled into something real and unspectacular in the best sense. Real, in that it was present in the fabric of his actual life. Unspectacular, in that it didn't look like anything a stranger would point at and call a grand romance. She came to his apartment on Tuesdays when she could leave the office by 6:30. He drove to her side of the city on Friday evenings when Maisie was with Carol. They talked every day, usually at night, sometimes brief and sometimes not. She was learning what he looked like when he was tired versus when he was worried, because they were different, and most people didn't distinguish. He was learning what her silences meant. She had at least 4 distinct kinds, and which ones required a question, and which ones just needed him to stay in the room. It was imperfect in the specific ways that real things are imperfect. She canceled twice in January because of work crises that genuinely required her, and the second time he'd felt the low irritation of a man who'd rearranged his week, and he'd said so, and she'd apologized without over-explaining, and they'd moved through it without drama. He burned dinner one Friday evening because he was trying to cook something more ambitious than his usual range, and she'd eaten it without complaint, but he'd seen her expression on the first bite and said, "It's bad, isn't it?" And she'd said, "It's very bad," and they'd ordered food instead, and he'd felt fine about it. These were the small calibrations of 2 people learning the weight and shape of each other. What he hadn't done yet was introduce her to Maisie, not because he'd been avoiding it, because it required the right moment, the right conditions, and enough honesty with himself about what it would mean. For Maisie, who was 4, and took people seriously in the way small children do, with the absolute commitment of someone who hadn't yet learned to protect themselves from disappointment. He wasn't going to bring someone into his daughter's life until he was certain that person intended to stay in it. He told Victoria this directly, one evening in early February. She'd listened without interrupting, which was how she listened to things she was actually receiving rather than waiting to respond to. "I understand," she'd said. "I want you to understand specifically," he'd said, "not as a delay, as a standard. She's the thing I protect first." "I know." Her voice had been steady. "I wouldn't want it any other way." A pause. "I also want to be clear about something. When we do this, when it's time, I'm not going to try to be her grandmother. I'm not going to insert myself into a role I don't have the history for." She'd looked at him. "I'd like to be someone she knows, someone she can trust eventually. That's all I'm asking for." He'd looked at her for a moment. "You've thought about this?" "Considerably," she'd said. "I know what I am in this situation. I know what I'm not." A slight pause. "I spent a long time being too much to my company and not enough to the people in my life. I'm not going to overcorrect by pretending I can walk in and be something I haven't earned." That was the thing about her that continued to catch him. Not the competence. He'd expected competence. The specific quality of her self-awareness. The way she could assess herself without collapsing into either self-flagellation or self-defense. She just looked at what was there and said it, and adjusted and moved. He'd told her the following week that he wanted her to meet Maisie. He didn't tell Maisie in advance what Victoria was. He told her that a friend of his was coming on Saturday afternoon and that her name was Victoria, and she was someone Daddy liked very much. Maisie had asked, "Is she nice?" "Yes," Nathan said. "Does she like rabbits?" "I honestly don't know. We can find out." Maisie had accepted this and gone back to her drawing. Victoria arrived at 2 o'clock on a Saturday in mid-February, and she did not bring flowers or a stuffed animal or anything that announced itself as a bid for affection, which was exactly right. Nathan had known she wouldn't, but he'd been relieved anyway. She came in a sweater and dark jeans, hair down, and she looked like a person who had thought carefully about not looking like she'd tried too hard. Maisie was on the floor of the living room with her rabbit and an assortment of crayons when Victoria walked in, and she looked up with the frank assessment of a 4-year-old, which is the most honest form of assessment available. "You're Victoria," Maisie said. I am, Victoria said. You're Maisie. Yes. Maisie considered her. Do you like rabbits? Victoria looked at the rabbit in Maisie's arms. It was missing one eye and had been repaired along one seam with the kind of stitching that spoke to a father doing his best with a needle and thread at 11 at night. I don't know many rabbits personally, Victoria said, but that one looks important. Maisie looked down at the rabbit, then back up. His name is Patches. He lost his eye, but Daddy fixed him. Good as new? Victoria asked. Better, Maisie said, with complete conviction. He's more interesting now. Nathan watched Victoria absorb that. Something moved through her expression, quiet, brief. She sat down on the floor, which Nathan had not expected, just folded herself down to Maisie's level without making a production of it, and looked at the crayons spread across the carpet. What are you drawing? She asked. A map, Maisie said. Of what? Of everything. Maisie said it with the expansive confidence of someone who saw no reason to limit the scope. This part is our house. This part is school. This part is where the ducks are. That's comprehensive, Victoria said. What does that mean? It means you've included a lot. Maisie seemed satisfied with this. She picked up a green crayon and added something to the lower corner of the map. Victoria watched her work. Nathan stood in the kitchen doorway and watched Victoria watch his daughter, and felt something happen in his chest that he didn't have a clean word for. Just a settling, a click of something finding its place. He made coffee. Let them be. By the time he came back, Maisie had handed Victoria a crayon and was directing her to add the lake to the map. And Victoria was doing it with the serious attention she gave to everything, asking where exactly the lake went and whether the ducks lived there year-round or just in summer. Maisie was explaining the ducks' seasonal habits with an authority that suggested she had given this considerable thought. It wasn't smooth. Victoria's duck contribution was spatially inaccurate, and Maisie pointed this out without diplomacy. Victoria accepted the correction and revised it. At one point, Maisie asked Victoria if she had any children, and Victoria said yes, one daughter, grown up now, and Maisie asked where she was. And Victoria said she lived far away, and Maisie said that must be lonely, and Victoria said very quietly that it was sometimes yes. Maisie patted Victoria's hand, brief, decisive, the way Maisie did all things. Then went back to the map. Nathan looked at the ceiling for a second. After an hour, Maisie announced she wanted a snack and got up and went to the kitchen with the expectation that the snack would produce itself, which Nathan followed to ensure. When he came back, Victoria was still on the floor, sitting back against the couch, with Patches the rabbit in her lap, and she was looking at him with an expression he'd only seen a few times, completely unmanaged, the armor entirely off. She told me to hold him while she was gone, Victoria said. She said he gets lonely. He has a rich emotional life, Nathan said. Victoria looked down at the rabbit. Her hand moved, almost involuntarily, to straighten his remaining ear. She's remarkable, she said quietly. Not performing it, just saying it. I know. She said the map needs a section for new places, places she hasn't been yet, but plans to go. Victoria looked up at him. She asked me to pick one. What did you pick? The ocean. I said she should add the ocean. A pause. She said she'd never seen it. I said neither had she yet, but that was the point of a map. You put the things you're going toward, not just the things you already know. But Nathan sat down on the couch above her. She tilted her head back to look at him, and he looked at her. This woman on his living room floor holding his daughter's one-eyed rabbit, who had walked into a restaurant in October expecting nothing and gotten something neither of them had mapped. Victoria, he said. Don't say something that makes me cry, she said. I'm not prepared for that. I was just going to say thank you. She looked at him for a moment. For what? For coming to the floor, he said. You didn't have to do that. She looked back at Patches. Yes, I did, she said simply. Claire called in March. Not Nathan. She never called Nathan. She called Victoria, which was their established pattern, the occasional contact that served some obligation they both maintained without fully wanting to. Victoria told him about it the evening after, sitting at his kitchen table with tea she was actually drinking this time rather than holding. She heard, Victoria said. Someone told her. About us. Nathan sat down across from her. How did she take it? She was angry, Victoria said it plainly. Not devastated. Claire doesn't devastate. She gets cold. A pause. She said it was a betrayal, that I'd gone to the other side. Those were her words. What did you say? I told her there weren't sides. Victoria looked at her cup. I told her that Nathan was a good man who had done nothing wrong, that her daughter was thriving in his care, and that what I chose to do with my personal life was mine to choose. She paused. She said she needed time to process it. Did she ask about Maisie? A silence that had its own answer. No, Victoria said. He sat with that. The particular grief of it, not surprising, not new, just the same absence wearing a different face. I'm sorry. I've been sorry about Claire for a long time, Victoria said. The specific grief of a parent who loves a child they cannot seem to reach. Her voice was even, but he knew by now what even cost her. I'm not going to stop loving her. I'm not going to stop hoping she finds a way toward her own life that doesn't require other people's losses. She looked up. But I'm also not going to let her determine what I'm permitted to have. She might not come around, he said. I know. That'll always be something between us, between all of us. I know that too. She held his gaze. I'm not asking for simple. I stopped asking for simple a long time ago. A pause. I'm asking for real. That's what you said to me, whatever that is. He remembered saying it. October, November. The accumulation of months of saying true things in small rooms over coffee and tea and burned dinners. Then we handle it, he said, when it needs handling, together. She nodded. Once. The way she agreed to things that mattered. Spring came the way it always does in that city. Not in a single moment, but in increments, the air changing by degrees, the light arriving earlier without announcing itself. Nathan started driving to work with the window down. Maisie began insisting on wearing her sandals before the temperature warranted it, which was a fight he chose not to have. Victoria had a key to his apartment by April. Not dramatically. He'd had a copy made and given it to her one evening when she'd been running late, and he'd thought it was inconvenient that she had to wait in the lobby. She'd looked at it for a moment and then put it in her bag without comment. But 2 days later she'd used it for the first time, arriving before him, and he'd come home to find her at his kitchen table with her laptop and a cup of tea she'd made herself from his cabinet, and Maisie sitting across from her demanding that Victoria explain what she was doing on the computer, and Victoria explaining the concept of a spreadsheet to a 4-year-old with the same serious attention she brought to board presentations. Maisie had declared spreadsheets boring but had stayed at the table anyway, drawing beside Victoria's laptop, the two of them in a companionable parallel quiet that Nathan stood in the doorway and took in for a moment before either of them heard him. He thought about what Maisie had said. He's more interesting now. He's better. He thought about Patch's missing his eye, and the map with the ocean on it, and the key in Victoria's bag. None of it was smooth. The weeks had rough edges. A Tuesday in March when Victoria had canceled with 40 minutes' notice, and he'd been short with her on the phone, and they'd had the kind of brief, honest argument that wasn't about the cancellation, and both of them knew it. A weekend in April when Maisie had been sick and he'd been running on 2 nights of bad sleep, and Victoria had come over and tried to be helpful in the efficient way she did things, and he'd had to say, as calmly as he could, that what he needed was for her to sit down and stop organizing his medicine cabinet. She'd sat down. They hadn't talked about it that night. The next morning she'd texted, I manage things when I feel helpless. I felt helpless, and you were already managing everything, and I made it worse. He'd called instead of texting back. They talked for 20 minutes, and he'd said the thing he needed to say, which was that he didn't need her to fix things, just to be there. And she'd said she was still learning the difference, and he believed her because he could see her learning it in real time. That was the thing nobody told you about building something with another person after you'd both been broken in specific ways. It wasn't one decision. It was 1,000 small ones, every week. The choice to say the true thing instead of the easy one, to stay in the room when it would be simpler to leave, to ask for what you needed, even when asking felt like exposure. Neither of them was naturally good at all of it. Both of them kept showing up anyway. By May, Daniel had met Victoria. Nathan had arranged it carefully. Dinner, nothing loaded, his apartment, The kind of evening that asked nothing except the willingness to be in the same room. Daniel had been on his best behavior, which for Daniel meant asking genuine questions rather than performing ease. And Victoria had been direct and dryly funny in the way she was when she felt secure enough to be. And by the end of the evening, Daniel had texted Nathan from the bathroom. Okay, I get it. I completely get it, which was all Nathan had needed. Maisie had not been told about the full complexity of who Victoria was in relation to her history. She was 4. The question of Claire's mother hadn't come up because Maisie had very little memory of Claire and no framework for grandmother in the traditional sense. What she had, by May, was Victoria. The woman who came on Tuesdays, who sat on the floor, who knew about spreadsheets and asked serious questions about rubber ducks, and had once spent 45 minutes helping trace the outline of patches on paper because Maisie had decided she wanted to draw him accurately and needed assistance with the ears. That would require a conversation eventually. Nathan knew that. When Maisie was older, when she asked the right questions, the whole picture would need to be given to her with the honesty she deserved. He wasn't afraid of that conversation. He'd learned to stop being afraid of the conversations that needed to happen eventually, because putting them off never made them easier. It just made the weight of the waiting heavier. He'd learned that from Victoria, actually. Watching her choose the truth in that boardroom when a lie would have been easier. Watching her tell him things he suspected she'd never told anyone, in the incremental way she gave things. Not all at once, not in a flood, but steadily, a piece at a time, the way you build something solid. It was a Saturday afternoon in late May when it finally became, without ceremony, the thing it was. Maisie had been at the park with Carol that morning and came home sunburned and tired, which was the best possible state for a 4-year-old because it meant she'd consent to lying on the couch and watching something instead of requiring active participation from the adults. Victoria had arrived mid-afternoon and she and Nathan were in the kitchen, making the kind of dinner that didn't require much attention, talking about nothing in particular, a podcast he'd listened to, a problem at her company that wasn't a crisis but was the kind of ongoing friction that required consistent management. From the living room, Maisie called, "Victoria, come see this part." Victoria looked at Nathan. He lifted his chin toward the living room. She dried her hands on the dish towel hanging from the oven handle and went. He listened from the kitchen, heard the couch shift as Victoria sat down, heard Maisie begin explaining whatever she was watching with the complete assumption that Victoria's attention was available and wanted, which was the clearest signal he knew of in Maisie's emotional vocabulary. She reserved that assumption for people she trusted. He kept making dinner. After a while, the volume from the living room went down slightly, and the talking replaced it. Maisie asking questions, Victoria answering, the back and forth of two people who had found, over months, a language they could both operate in. He could hear Victoria's voice, but not always the words, low and even, and Maisie's higher register cutting in and out. He thought about October, the restaurant, the woman who had walked in and nearly turned around. He thought about the text at 1 a.m. I don't normally do this. He thought about a boardroom and a photograph and the truth laid out plainly on a table. He thought about a key in a bag and a rabbit with one eye, and a map with the ocean on it, and a 4-year-old who had patted Victoria's hand and gone back to her drawing as though comfort was the simplest thing in the world, which maybe for children it was. He thought about Claire. The grief of that. Complex, unresolved. The way some things stayed unresolved not because you'd failed to address them, but because they weren't yours to fix. He'd spent 3 years trying to figure out what he'd done wrong. He understood now that some absences aren't a verdict on the person left behind. Some people leave because of what's in them, not because of what's lacking in you. Knowing that didn't make Maisie's other parent less absent. It just meant he'd stopped carrying the wrong weight. He thought about his mother in Cincinnati who called every Sunday and who, last month, had asked to speak to Victoria. And Victoria had taken the phone with a slightly startled expression and spoken to his mother for 12 minutes while Nathan stood very still in the kitchen trying not to monitor the conversation too obviously. Afterward, his mother had called back the next Sunday and said, "She's serious, Nathan. She's a serious woman. Don't be an idiot." He'd said he was doing his best. His mother had said that was usually enough if you meant it. He thought about what it meant to mean it. He thought about 33 years old and the specific shape of his life. The divorce that had felt like an ending, the 3 years of suspension. The October evening he'd stood on a sidewalk in the cold and watched a car pull away and felt, For the first time in a long time, something moved. He thought about how he'd told Daniel he didn't know if it was good or bad. And Daniel had asked, and he'd said he'd tell him when he figured it out. He'd figured it out. He put the pasta on and turned down the heat and went to the doorway between the kitchen and the living room. Victoria was on the couch with Maisie pressed against her side. Patches the rabbit deposited in Victoria's lap in the way that Maisie deposited Patches when she wanted to share something important. Victoria had her arm along the back of the couch, not quite around Maisie, close enough that the warmth was there. She was watching the screen, but her face was soft. That was the only word for it. The professional architecture entirely gone. Just a woman on a couch with a child who had decided she was trustworthy. Maisie noticed him in the doorway. "Daddy, you're missing it." "I'll catch up," he said. "You can't catch up," Maisie said, with the impatience of someone for whom narrative continuity was non-negotiable. "Come sit." He came and sat. Maisie rearranged herself automatically, filling the space between them the way she always did, and Patches redistributed between Maisie's lap and Nathan's knee, and the four of them, Nathan, Maisie, Victoria, One-Eyed Patches, watched the remaining 20 minutes of whatever Maisie had selected, and Nathan didn't track a single moment of it. He was too busy being aware of the weight of his daughter against his side, and the particular quiet of Victoria beside them, and the specific ordinary realness of this moment in his living room in late May, with the windows letting in the last of the afternoon light. Afterward, Maisie fell asleep between them with the totality that only small children achieve. Mid-sentence, essentially, here and then gone. Victoria looked at Nathan across her and he looked back. "She's out," Victoria said very quietly. "She does that. Absolute states only. All the way on, all the way off." Victoria looked down at Maisie's sleeping face. The expression was back. The one she got when she thought no one was watching, soft and unguarded, and carrying all the complicated weight of what this was and wasn't and might become. "I want to tell you something," Victoria said, still quiet. "Okay." She stopped, tried again. "Accounting, in the way I account for things. Looking at this from the outside, from the analyst position, trying to categorize it and assess the risk and identify what could go wrong." She looked up at him. "And what I keep arriving at every time is that I don't care about the risk the way I used to. The cost-benefit doesn't look the way it looked before." She paused. "I don't know if that's growth or just wanting something badly enough that the math stops mattering." "Maybe both," Nathan said. "Maybe both," she agreed. "I wanted you to know that I've stopped trying to find the reason to stop." A pause. "I'm not going anywhere." He held her gaze across the sleeping weight of his daughter. "I know," he said. "I know that." "How?" "Because you're on my couch on a Saturday with a one-eyed rabbit in your lap and you're still here." He said it quietly. "That's not nothing. For you, that's everything." She looked at him for a long moment. Her eyes were bright, and she was not going to cry. He knew that. She would never, but the brightness was there. "It is," she said simply. "It is everything." Maisie shifted in her sleep, made a small indeterminate sound, resettled. The apartment held them. Outside, the May evening was doing what May evenings did. Pulling the light out slowly, gold going amber, going the particular blue that came before dark. The city beginning its nightly transformation from the hard edges of day into something slightly softer. They didn't move for a long time. There wasn't any reason to. But here is what is true about love the second time around, or the first time around in a new shape, which is really what this was. So it doesn't announce itself. It doesn't arrive with the clarity of something you chose in a clean moment of decision. It accretes. It builds the way sediment builds, layer by invisible layer, until one day you look down and realize there is ground under your feet where there was none before. Nathan Holloway had spent 3 years learning how to raise a daughter alone and how to live small enough that the life he'd lost didn't keep showing its edges. He'd done it adequately. He'd loved Maisie with everything he had and gotten through the days and told himself that was sufficient, which for a long time it was. What he'd forgotten, or maybe never known, was that sufficient and full are not the same thing, that a life can be functional and still be missing half its weight. Victoria Ashbourne had spent 2 decades learning how to be alone so efficiently that the loneliness had become invisible, even to her. She'd built something real and demanding and hers, and she'd mistaken the building for living. She'd kept the world at exactly the distance where it couldn't hurt her, and what she'd gotten in exchange was safety and emptiness in equal measure. They'd found each other at the worst possible angle, the most improbable, structurally awkward, publicly inexplicable version of a second chance either of them could have invented. And they'd stayed anyway. Not because it was simple, but because the alternative was going back to the smaller versions of themselves. And neither of them could stand that anymore. This is the thing about the unexpected shape. You don't get to choose it. The right thing doesn't always come in a form you recognize. Sometimes it comes as a woman walking through a restaurant door who nearly turned around and didn't. Sometimes it comes as a dinner that was supposed to last 1 hour and lasted 3. Sometimes it comes as the most uncomfortable possible starting point. Old history, complicated ties, a name in a file, and a photograph on a boardroom table, and a child who doesn't fully know the whole story yet. You don't get to choose the shape. You only get to choose whether you stay. They both stayed. Marcus Reeves left Ashbourne's strategic group in April, the board having concluded that his conduct during the review process reflected a pattern of behavior incompatible with leadership integrity. He went quietly, which Victoria had expected. People who operated the way Marcus operated didn't tend to fight the exits. They calculated the costs and moved on to the next position, where the calculation might run differently. She didn't feel victorious about it. She felt the specific flat relief of a problem correctly resolved, and then she turned back to running the company she'd built and moved forward. Candace Holt sent her a brief note after the proceedings closed. It said, "You made it easy by telling the truth. More people should try it." Victoria had framed it privately in her mind. Didn't put it on a wall, just carried it. Gerald Watts at Nathan's firm received a formal communication from the board's audit team confirming the Delmar contract was outside the scope of their findings. He'd read it, filed it, and said nothing to Nathan about it beyond. Glad that's resolved. Nathan had said likewise, and they'd both gone back to work, which was the most Gerald could offer, and Nathan had long since made his peace with that. Daniel threw a dinner in March that was nominally for other reasons, but was actually for the specific purpose of acknowledging, without stating, that things had worked out. He made too much food and opened good wine and spent the evening being delighted in the uncomplicated way of someone who'd worried about his friend for 3 years and was no longer worrying. Victoria had arrived with the slightly wary posture she brought to situations she hadn't fully mapped. And by the end of the evening, she and Daniel's wife, Renata, had discovered a shared and surprisingly intense investment in the same genre of crime fiction, and were deep in a conversation that had excluded everyone else at the table for 30 minutes. Nathan and Daniel had looked at each other across the table. "I didn't expect that," Nathan said. "Life contains surprises," Daniel said, and lifted his glass. Maisie turned 5 in June. The party was the particular chaos of 5-year-old birthday parties. Too much noise, someone crying briefly for unclear reasons, a cake that Nathan had ordered from a bakery and that had a rabbit on it at Maisie's specific request. Victoria came. She stood at the edge of the controlled disaster of 8 5-year-olds in his living room with the expression of someone encountering a natural phenomenon they'd read about but never witnessed. And when Nathan checked on her, she said quietly that she was fine. It was loud. She was observing. He'd laughed. She'd almost smiled. Maisie had found her 20 minutes later and pulled her toward the craft table with the complete authority of a birthday girl who knew what she wanted, and Victoria had gone. Later, when the other children had gone and Maisie was crashing from birthday sugar and Carol was cleaning up and Nathan was sitting on the back steps of the apartment with a beer he'd barely touched, Victoria came and sat beside him in the evening that was still warm and loud with June and the sounds of the building around them. "You're all right?" he asked. "I'm very all right," she said. She told all her friends my name, at the craft table. Something quiet in her voice. She said, "This is Victoria, she's mine." Nathan looked at her. "She's mine," Victoria repeated. Just that, the specific weight of it. He put his arm around her. She leaned into him. Not dramatically, not more than she needed to, just enough. The June evening around them, the city doing its thing, the sounds of his apartment through the open door. They'd stopped waiting for the other shoe. Not because nothing could go wrong, Things would go wrong. That was the nature of actual life, rather than the managed version. Claire might reach out again and require navigation. Maisie would grow up and ask questions that deserved complete answers. The company would have other Marcuses, other crises. Nathan would have days where the old weight came back without warning, and Victoria would have nights where the distance was her first instinct, and she'd have to choose against it consciously. None of that was solved. It was just held by people who had decided to hold it together rather than apart. Here's what Nathan knew, sitting on the back steps of his apartment building in June with a woman who had once been the most improbable person in his world. That love is not proof against difficulty. It doesn't prevent the hard things. It just means you don't face them in the particular hollow way of a person who faces them alone. Here is what Victoria knew, leaning against the shoulder of a man she had very nearly not given a chance to, that keeping people at a distance only feels like safety, that the thing she'd been protecting herself from for 20 years, the risk of being known, of being stayed with, of having something that could be lost, was also the only thing worth having. Here's what Maisie knew, 5 years old and asleep inside with patches and a birthday crown, having introduced Victoria to 8 of her friends as simply and completely hers. Nothing, in the analytical sense. She just knew what she felt. She'd decided in October, when Nathan had first described the woman who was coming to their house, that she'd find out if she liked her. She'd found out. She did. Children are practical that way. They take the information that's in front of them and use it. They don't carry the weight of context the way adults do, all the history and complication and reasons why. They just look at the person in front of them and ask whether that person sat on the floor with them, and Victoria had, and so it was settled. The evening went the way evenings go, not to a conclusion, just forward. The sun finishing its business with the horizon. The city settling into its nighttime register. The back steps of an ordinary apartment building in an ordinary city, where nothing remarkable was happening except that 2 people who had arrived at this particular back door from different and unlikely directions were sitting together and not for once waiting for a reason to leave. Nathan finished his beer. Victoria was quiet beside him. "What are you thinking?" he asked. She thought about it for a moment. "That I don't want to be anywhere else right now," she said, "which is new. I usually want to be somewhere else, somewhere more efficient, more structured." She looked at the evening. "Right now I just want this." "Then we'll stay," he said. She nodded, leaned a fraction closer. They stayed,